Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Before we hear from our speaker, it's our tradition to go around and introduce ourselves first. My name is Tom.
Douglas.
My name is Gary.
My name is Douglas.
My name is Cass.
My name is Stan.
I'm Clint.
Oswaldo.
My name is Jerry.
Laura.
Patrick.
My name is Mark.
My name is Robert.
I'm Alsac.
My name is Michael.
My name is Adam.
My name is Henry.
I'm Pat.
My name is Phil.
I'm Marty.
I'm Grisha.
Jeff.
I'm Hal. Richard.
My name is Chandler.
Jay.
Great. Is anybody here for the first time or returning after a long absence? Great. Well, today we have the privilege of hearing again from our own David Lewis. David is doing a series on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and today will be part 2. David has been following the Dharma path for 40 years and has a degree in comparative religious studies. He attended his first retreat in the Shambhala tradition at the age of 17, just a few years ago, and has been practicing meditation since moving to San Francisco over 25 years ago. He teaches insight meditation course at the Mission Dharma Sangha he led the Gay Buddhist Fellowship 2013 Fall Residential Retreat. 2014 retreat, which we just had.
That one too?
Both. And facilitates a weekly meditation group for seniors. He's a graduate of Spirit Rock Meditation Center's Dedicated Practitioners Program. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here again, sitting on this side of the room. A friend of mine a while back sent me a link to an article that was in the Atlantic magazine, and it was about, it was kind of the synopsis of a research study that had appeared in the scholarly journal Science. And in this study, a researcher in psychology did an experiment where basically the researcher and their team asked a group of research subjects to sit quietly with their thoughts and then report on that experience. So it's not about meditation. Just regular people sit quietly with your thoughts. See what happens. And to their surprise, they really weren't expecting this. The majority of people found it to be a pretty unpleasant experience. Might sound familiar to some of you. And so they continued the experiment, and they even at one point gave the subjects the opportunity to either continue sitting with their thoughts for a period of time or give themselves an electric shock. Believe it or not, the majority of men in the study chose the electric shock. So, that's pretty interesting, huh? That's dukkha. That's a great example of dukkha, or dissatisfaction, or what happens when we actually sit down and get quiet and pay attention to our experience. We find that our experience is not quite so peaceful and quiet as we might have thought it was. And how this relates to meditation, I find to be really interesting, because when people try to meditate, and if they don't get any instruction, if they don't have a teacher, and they don't have any kind of support, when people try to meditate, basically what they're doing is they're closing their eyes and sitting with their thoughts and finding it to be a terrible experience. So it really helps to have some instruction, and we're privileged to have that every once in a while here at GPF. So meditation is not just about sitting and talking to ourselves, which is kind of what that default process is that they studied in that they looked at in that study. Meditation is the practice of mindfulness, and mindfulness is nothing more than being receptive to whatever's happening in the present moment without judgment. The key words being receptive, present moment, and without judgment. So when people, I teach a beginning meditation course. I'm actually in the middle of doing it right now. And when beginners in meditation tell me that they can't meditate, or they've tried and they just can't do it, or it's really difficult for them, I think what they're talking about, if we explore it a little bit, is not being present in the moment, not the part about being receptive in the moment, because there's nothing easier, right, than simply being receptive to what's happening in the moment. The problem is the judgment part, is they can't turn off their judging mind. In other words, they very often have this idea of what meditation is, and when they close their eyes and relax and try to achieve their idea of what meditation is, they get something else altogether different, and they think they're doing it wrong. They think they're making a mistake. And then they judge that experience, like, oh, I'm not any good at this, or it doesn't work, or my mind doesn't go all tranquil like it's supposed to when you meditate. But being receptive in the present moment without judgment means that, you might be witnessing a monkey mind, a busy mind, where your thoughts are just jumping around in an uncontrolled manner in the same way that monkeys kind of play in the trees, call it monkey mind. And if you can withhold judgment about that and just see it as a process, it's bearable. You don't have to give yourself an electric shock. So that's mindfulness, being receptive in the present moment without judgment. And meditation is not exactly the same thing as mindfulness. Meditation is simply the practical application of mindfulness. Meditation is when we intend to sit down and do nothing but be mindful of our experience, as we just did for half an hour. Well, we can be mindful in everyday life. It's more difficult when we have lots of sense objects happening, and we're talking to people and interacting and looking around, and there's a lot of distractions. It's harder to be mindful. It's easier when we meditate and practice it. So the Buddha had this wonderful teaching, and the sutta that is called the Satipatthana Sutta. That sutta is a teaching about mindfulness, about what to do with our minds when we meditate, what to do, how to be mindful. Because meditation is not that passive activity where we just sit and listen to ourselves talk. Meditation is about the practical application and an intentional look at what's going on with the mind, and then working with that. So there's a whole list of instructions that the Buddha gave about how to be mindful, what to do with the mind in meditation, and they're really useful. And what I love about it is that it gives you a wonderful menu of meditation practices. So if whatever you're doing in your meditation isn't working, there's something else you can try, or there's an antidote to that. So there are 4 foundations of mindfulness, and I'm giving 4 talks on them. And the first talk, some of you might have heard last month, a month ago. The first talk was mindfulness of the body. And mindfulness of the body is the most fundamental foundation of mindfulness because we always have our body. Our body is always at the present moment. And our body includes our breath. So it's fundamental because if we get lost in thought or confused or we're all caught up in some feeling or emotion or mental habit, we can come back to our breath. We can come back to our body and kind of reboot and re-enter the present moment. If you want to get out of your head, there's nothing more effective than getting into your body. So that's what I talked about last month. And the body is a really easy thing to be receptive about. You just sit down and pay attention to, okay, what's going on with my body? What's my breath doing? Just be receptive. Just notice. But the next 3 foundations of mindfulness, is what I'm going to be talking about this month and in upcoming talks, are more about working with the mind, working with what goes on with the mind and doing some investigation. Knowing and training the mind. Knowing the mind and training it. And the reason we want to know the mind and train the mind is because that's the path to happiness. That's the path to freedom. The Buddha said, I teach only suffering and the end of suffering. That's the only thing the Buddha taught, was suffering and the end of suffering. And another way of putting that is the Buddha taught happiness and the path to happiness. It's just the flip side of the coin. So understanding and retraining the mind, reconditioning the mind is how we create happiness in our lives. So the first foundation of mindfulness is about the body. The second foundation of mindfulness, very fundamental, is in the Pali language, in the Buddhist language, it's called Vedanas. And that's translated as feeling tones. And it's not feelings like we normally define them in English as emotions. Emotions in Buddhism actually come under the category of thoughts, into the category of thoughts. And that's what we're talking about next month. But feeling tones, or Vedanas, and I'm going to keep using that word, Vedanas. Feeling tones are simply one of 3 things. Feeling tones are either the experience of pleasant, the experience of unpleasant, or the experience of neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Joseph Goldstein, who is one of my favorite teachers and a really prominent Western meditation teacher, says, mindfulness of feeling tones is one of the master keys that both reveals and unlocks the deepest patterns of our suffering. So feeling tones, noticing feeling tones is really fundamental to this practice of finding more happiness and eliminating unhappiness in our lives. Feeling tones, I already said, is the Vedanas, is the second foundation of mindfulness, topic of this day's talk. It's also one of the 5 aggregates. And the 5 aggregates are the 5 things that make you up as a human being. So one of the 5 fundamental things about being human is having these feeling tones. And Vedana is also a really important link, a key link in the chain of dependent origination, and that's a whole other talk, dependent origination. But basically, dependent origination, that teaching is a flow chart of how we either create suffering or create happiness in our experience. So Vedanas, the teaching of Vedanas show up in all these different areas. So pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. These are not judgments. Vedanas are precognitive. So it might be a little hard to wrap your head around. Vedanas are precognitive. So anything that happens in your experience, from a bodily sensation, an ache in your knee, to a thought, to an emotion, to a sound that you hear, to your sensation of whatever the temperature in this room is, whatever phenomena you're noticing right now in this moment has one of those feeling tones. It's either pleasant, it's unpleasant, or it's neutral. And it might change. So think about it. The temperature in the room right now. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neutral? And this is precognitive. This is before you decide pleasant is something I like and unpleasant is something that I don't like. That's judgmental. That's judging. You can't stop vagueness. You can't avoid them. Everything is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So vagueness, these feeling tones, condition our reactions to what's happening in our mind and what's happening in the world. So going back to that study, when these students were asked to sit down and be quiet and just be with their whatever's going on with their minds, sit quietly with their thoughts, the first thing that came up for them is that it was unpleasant for many, for the majority. It was an unpleasant activity. And the next thing was, I need to get rid of it. I'll do anything to distract myself from this unpleasant activity, right down to giving myself a shock so that I don't have to do it anymore. So that's a whole chain of going from unpleasant to I don't like it to I need to get rid of it, I really hate this. And we do the same thing with the pleasant. If we have a pleasant experience, it's, oh, this is really nice. I want this to continue. I don't want it to go away. And now you're in fear already. I'm afraid that it's going away. Or you're in grasping, clinging. I want to hold on to this. And that's suffering too. When we are not mindful, when we're not noticing this process happening, pleasant feelings habitually condition desire and clinging. Unpleasant feelings habitually condition dislike and aversion. And neutral feelings habitually condition delusion, not knowing what's going on. So vagueness, feeling tones, is the very core beginning of the process of creating dukkha, of creating discomfort in the world. And dukkha is basically being uncomfortable with whatever's going on. I want more of the good stuff, I want less of the bad stuff. We're either pushing or pulling. And that's suffering. That's what makes our lives stressful and uncomfortable, is not being comfortable with whatever's going on in the moment. So, in this sense, since vaguenas are precognitive, and they happen no matter what, I'm not telling you to stop having them because you can't. Nor, might be a real stretch for you, nor is pleasant good or unpleasant bad. My pleasant might not be your pleasant. I don't know how you're relating to this warm weather, but late yesterday afternoon, I was finding it pretty unpleasant. And I went outside and took my dog for a walk and ran into my neighbor who's from Tahiti, and she said, "Isn't this great?" So my pleasant might not be your unpleasant, and so we can even have this experience in our every momentary experience. Whatever's going on, whatever thought is arising, is unpleasant, pleasant or neutral. If we don't judge it, then it's just pleasant or unpleasant, and then it will change. It'll be something else. If we do judge it, then we're reacting, then we get all caught up in it, and then we start creating stress. So this ability to see what's happening in the present moment of our experience without judging, without getting on the bandwagon, is the beginning of freedom from suffering. How we go about freeing ourselves from stress. I know most of you have heard about the two arrows metaphor that the Buddha uses, but I'm going to repeat it just because you can't say it enough. The Buddha said that every experience we have, no matter what it is, consists of, it is really two experiences. One is whatever happens to us, and the second experience is how we respond to that. So even a thought or a memory is a phenomenon. It's an experience. If we have a memory, it just pops up all by itself. That's the first arrow that hits us. And we don't usually invite memories. They just show up, right? They just kind of hit us like an arrow. Like, whoa, where'd that come from? So that's the first arrow, is having a memory. The second arrow is how we respond to that. So if we have a memory of something we did in the past that was unskillful and we regret, the second arrow is remorse or guilt. Likewise, the first arrow can be anything. It can be any phenomena. If you catch a cold, that's just something that happens, not your fault. You got a cold, you got a bug, you got a cold. That's the first arrow. The second arrow is how you respond to that. Like, oh, this is really a drag. Now I'm either going to have to go to work and be miserable or not go to work, and I don't deserve this, and why is this happening to me? And I'm really feeling miserable, and it's just going to ruin my week. So it's a beautiful metaphor, because the Buddha said, pay attention to the difference between the first arrow and the second arrow, because the first arrow, more often than not, we can't do anything about. The first arrow is what happens to us in life. You get a cold, you get a cold. The second arrow is how we respond to it, and the second arrow is what we can have an impact on, what we have a choice about. It's our response. So, every experience, every thought, every sound we hear, every physical sensation we have has this core attribute of either being pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Kind of dependent on your karma, on how you have learned to experience life. And the second arrow is what you do with that, or whether you do anything with it. So learning how to simply be with whatever's coming up in the present moment, without judging, and just being responsive. In other words, practicing mindfulness can be a really tremendously great support in everyday life, and learning how to not create so much suffering for ourselves. So it's a practice that has given me a lot of solace and created a lot of happiness in my life. Simply learning how to be with whatever's going on without judging it. What happens if we don't do that? If we're not mindful, if we get caught up in hope and fear responses? And it's really interesting how much hope and fear regulates our lives and our behaviors. Fear of, I don't want that to happen. Or even fear of something, if something good's going on. Fear of losing it. I don't want to lose that. I want to keep the good stuff in my life, and I want to push away the bad stuff in my life. So the alternative is not getting lost in that kind of reactivity. It's possible to end our suffering by abandoning these reactive tendencies in our mind. And that's what the practice is about. That's what meditation practice is about. So I really want to invite you and encourage you to play with this in your meditation. For one thing, if you're not being mindful, if you're not meditating regularly, give it a try. And try to work in this reminder all the time of not being judgmental of whatever's going on. If your meditation is not perfect tranquility or calm, see if you can not be judgmental about that. And just say, okay, I'm just going to sit anyway, see what happens. And notice that it changes and it passes away. The difficult stuff changes, passes away. The pleasant stuff changes and passes away. Sometimes working with pleasant in meditation practice is just as difficult or more so than working with unpleasant, because we have a pleasant meditation and everything seems kind of calm and tranquil and pleasant, and our next meditation is not like that, and we think, well, what happened? I thought I had it. I thought I got it down, and now it's different. Well, that's the way the mind works, no matter how experienced you are. So meditation and mindfulness isn't so much about creating more pleasant experience. And this is the mistake that so many of us make, is we're doing meditation in order to get something, to get more pleasant, right? Meditation isn't about creating pleasant or pushing away unpleasant. That's what we do in everyday life. That's what creates our suffering. It's grasping at pleasant, pushing away unpleasant. Mindfulness practice is about accepting the pleasant and the unpleasant without being judgmental about it, and realizing that whatever happens passes, and finding some equanimity, some peace out of that. It's really difficult for us to do, especially us Westerners, because we tend to be so judgmental. There's a story I heard once about when Westerners, Americans, first started going to Asia to learn how to meditate, and it might have been Joseph Goldstein, one of our early teachers, was doing a meditation retreat of 2 or 3 years with a very famous Asian Thai meditation master, and in an interview, the meditation teacher asked him, how's it going? And Joseph said, well, I just, I'm having a lot of thoughts, and I'm particularly having a lot of judgmental thoughts about, I'm not good enough, and I'm not doing this right, and it's really hard, and I'm just beating myself up. And the meditation teacher looked really confused, just baffled, and said, well, just don't do that. So it's kind of a cultural thing for us that doesn't exist so much in Asian cultures, this self-critical, constant judging mind. It's a really good thing to be aware of, and to, and again, to not try, at least right away, don't try to change it. Just go, oh, there's my judgmental mind going. Isn't that interesting? Look how much time I spend judging myself, especially in meditation. Look how much time I spend criticizing my experience. This isn't what's supposed to be happening. Something else is supposed to be happening. So this is step 2 in the path to end suffering. Noticing the qualities of our experience, noticing pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, before we turn them into judgments, noticing them as a core experience in the present moment. So it's an option for your meditation. Last month, when I was talking about the first foundation of the body, I was saying when you meditate, stay focused on your breath, stay focused on your body. Whenever your mind wanders, come back to your body. This month, with Vednas, with the second foundation of mindfulness, we're starting to investigate the nature of our experience. Next month, we're going to be talking about working with thoughts, which will be really interesting. But this month, it's about investigating the nature of our experience and this quality of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So if you want, in your meditation, or even just in everyday life, driving the car, every once in a while, just check in. What's the quality of my experience? Is driving the car pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Is crawling into bed at night pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Is what I'm having for lunch pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And just notice the quality of that experience. And then let it go. Let it be. If it's unpleasant, you just go, oh, unpleasant is happening. Unpleasant feels like this. And then it'll be something else. So it's a great tool to have in your meditation toolbox, and it's kind of an interesting thing to play with. Learning about the mind is really interesting. Exploring our minds is interesting. Meditation should be interesting for you. I hope it is. So thank you for your attention once again. And I'm happy to entertain questions or comments or feedback or objections, whether they be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Yes, John.
Thank you, David, for clarifying a very difficult subject. It's difficult in the degree of subtlety of it. I remember being on retreat with Donald Rothberg he said, basically, one of his teachers, Bruein, said 90% of spiritual work occurs in the Vednas. And that in terms of the end of suffering, that is really, it's so critical to nip it. The thoughts, all the reactivity that usually follows right there, because it's just so reflexive.
Yeah.
It's like reptilian.
It is reptilian. Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because it's, I didn't say this, but in the chain of dependent origination, which is this flow chart about how we experience the world and how we react and how we create our suffering. It's like a 12-step chain. And Vednas is about the fourth step from the bottom. The first step being contact. Is our mind contacts and experience. But anyway, Vednas, this is supporting what you're saying, Vednas is the step at which it's most easy to change your experience, to stop your reactive response and do something else. Because once we get into clinging and grasping and pushing away, which are more advanced steps in the process, it's really hard to change anything. Once you get attached to wanting something, it's hard to stop the wanting. But if you're at the step of just noticing, oh, this is pleasant, and you can just let it be, then suffering ends right there. Oswaldo.
While we were meditating, somebody walked across the room upstairs, and the water pipe started making a pretty loud noise. And, I think for me that was a good example of that. I noticed in this unpleasant. But there's also part of that was anticipating, it's ending, or hearing the next time the steps were happening, anticipating an unpleasant experience, and that by itself was unpleasant.
Perfect example. And sound is a really easy place I find to work with this, because a sound you can kind of depersonalize a little bit. It's not so much like a thought or a memory. A sound is just a sound. It can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And Yeah, I had the same experience. I heard that sound and thought, oh, okay, that's loud, kind of unpleasant, and then I just let go of it. But sounds can sometimes be a really great help in your meditation practice, because if you get caught up in thoughts like we all do and start drifting away and thinking about something else, and somebody sneezes or coughs, it can bring you right back into the moment. So it can be a blessing. Please.
Thank you. I'm having difficulty wrapping my brain around pleasant, unpleasant, neutral as not being judgments.
Yeah.
I can get a little bit of the difference between those and the following judgment, but they still seem like judgments to me.
Yeah, that's a really common struggle. It's hard to separate kind of the core reptilian feeling of pleasant from the judgment that happens immediately, which is that pleasant is good or unpleasant is bad. I can only say practice with it. See if you can notice pleasant and unpleasant in your experience without jumping right away to good or bad. This is good or bad. So, hot weather can be pleasant or unpleasant depending on kind of what your preferences are. Can you just say, oh, okay, well, it's hot today. Hot's like that. Hot feels like this.
That sounds like the objective is that everything always ends up being neutral. I guess I don't see how the experience of pleasant can't shift into good versus unpleasant being bad.
It's our habit of mind to do that. It's our habit of mind to label pleasant good and unpleasant bad. It's one of the ways that this quandary you're pointing out is used in meditation practice very effectively is in working with pain. And there are meditation teachers that are much more adept than I am at helping people work with pain. And if you have chronic pain, say you've got a bad knee or chronic backache, our minds very quickly jump from, okay, this is unpleasant, it's bad, I have to do something about it. This is the status of my being. This is I've got a bad back and it's really unpleasant and I'm really suffering a lot. If instead of doing that, you go back to the core unpleasant experience. Okay, I've got a backache. And instead of labeling it bad, got to get rid of it, notice the physical characteristics of it. That means, okay, it's burning, it's throbbing, it's tingling, it comes and goes, it moves around, or it stays in the same place. It's warm, it's heat. If you can start noticing those on a very intimate level, those aspects of pain, what you'll notice is that it changes all the time. The tingling comes and goes, the heat comes and goes, and then you notice that the quality of pain is not constant, and that there's actually periods of relief. So if you can understand pain, an unpleasant feeling in that way, rather than labeling it bad and permanent, you'll suffer a lot less. Say, oh, okay, it's now it's burning, now it's tingling, now it's not so bad, now it's coming and going. So we're noticing and this is what we do always with meditation practice, is we try to stay with the direct experience of what's actually going on without labeling too much. I don't know how to better explain it to you, but it is our habit. Does somebody help me out with this? It is our habit to put labels on our experience just immediately.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the labels might be attraction and aversion, so that it's, as opposed to pleasant and unpleasant, which makes it sound like you're judging because of you're using two versions of the same word. Or something.
Could. Certainly
But
could.
attraction is kind of like magnetic or something. It's like,
Yeah.
despite yourself, you're drawn to something.
Yeah, it's those are perfectly fine labels, but I can also see calling those judging too.
Yeah.
It's maybe we're just not using the right language for pleasant or unpleasant, but pleasant or unpleasant is such a core thing. It's reptilian, as Jeffrey said. Actually, when I was thinking about this the other day, the example that came to my head that'll make you laugh is when I drive by a feedlot in the Central Valley and I smell common, it's pleasant. Because I was raised in farm country. I was raised in the Midwest, and it brings up childhood. Like, oh, I know that smell. That's familiar. I kind of like it. But that's probably not most of your experience. I would guess most people find it unpleasant. But it's just this kind of reptilian thing that comes to me right away. And if I actually think about it a bit, like, okay, that's sulfur and whatever it is, I'll decide it's unpleasant. Like, okay, yeah, it's really not a very good smell. But my core direct experience is pleasant. Yes?
Thanks for your talk. And I like to say, is it Allah or is it God? Because this is what I've been struggling with a lot. And at your last talk, part one, it was very helpful for me, very practical advice, and I've been applying it where I come back to the body, come back to the breath. But man, I've had really, really active monkey mind every time I meditate. And actually, I haven't meditated as often because of it. I've started to kind of like get frustrated. On Friday, I went to another Dharma talk, and that's why I say it's about there's a God. That whole Dharma talk was about monkey mind, and like the analogy that he gave was that you're on the freeway of meditation, and your brain's constantly looking for an exit to get out of being present. And so you see the exit, are you going to take it or not? Don't take the exit. And the way to not take the exit for me has been, during this whole meditation, I had month of mine, I was thinking, don't take the exit, and I would say, I start coming back to counting my breaths. And but the thing that's funny is the layers of judgment. So I see the exit, I judge myself, oh, you're seeing the exit, you want to take the exit, oh, you took the exit, you're not supposed to take the exit, stupid, get back to the breath, no, I'm still on the exit. It's like this whole like spiral. And it just like I feel like I want something, like I want the pipe to turn on, so get back on the and another analogy I heard about I too struggle with the idea of this pleasant unpleasant thing, like the analogy that someone gave right after a Dharma talk where someone's cell phone was ringing during the meditation. They said, if you're sitting on a cushion and someone's cell phone rings, it's unpleasant. And then you start thinking, what an asshole, why do you turn his phone off? And then it's like you take it, you go there.
Yeah.
Whereas if a dog was sitting on the cushion napping and the cell phone went off, the dog's ears might perk up for a second, but he would just, or she would just lay back down. It wouldn't turn into this like story.
Yeah. Yeah, the other place, thank you, that was really beautiful. The other place I go when somebody's cell phone goes off, what happens with me now, because I've been working with groups like this for so many years now, is I feel really badly for that person. Like, oh, I'm glad I'm not that person. And once I was teaching like I am today, and I was in the middle of the meditation, I realized that I had forgotten to turn my cell phone on. And I suffered a lot. It never went off. I suffered a lot. But
Yeah, a couple things. That's the story you told about the meditation master reminds me of a story I heard about the Dalai Lama, which may or may not be apocryphal, where a Westerner was interviewing him a long time ago and asked him about self-hatred. And the Dalai Lama was totally perplexed. He said, I don't understand what you're talking about. And when the Westerner explained this is such a common phenomenon in the West, the Dalai Lama started crying for how horrible suffering it must be to experience that. But it was a concept that was alien to him.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that really happened, but I heard this story.
Yeah, that's very similar.
Yeah. I do have a question about, I can understand the reactivity, and from somebody who has a struggle with road rage, that's an issue for me. But there are times where taking action does cease the unpleasant experience, or keeps for a little while longer the pleasant experience. And I'm trying to separate that from trying to be reactive, like I got to change it, versus I have an itch, okay, well I'm going to scratch rather than just sit here and itch.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like that's a negative, unspiritual thing to do.
No, obviously, if there's something you can do about your situation to make it better or make it less worse, by all means, do it. Nobody's saying, don't take action in the world. We don't become passive.
Yeah, so that isn't like being reactive to just address the issue. I guess reactive, in my sense, is kind of like an emotional flare-up that doesn't really change the situation, except making you feel worse than when it first happened.
Yeah, well, reactive can be very subtle. Reactive, there's all different levels of reactive, but the interesting thing, the scratching the itch thing is an interesting thing. It's often brought up in teaching meditation. Did you ever notice that what happens if you don't scratch an itch? Usually goes away all by itself.
No, it goes away sooner if you scratch it.
So that itch might be a bad relationship, it might be a handicap, it might be, your struggles with your boss. There's a lot of itches in life, and scratching them immediately isn't always necessarily the best long-term solution.
Sometimes when you scratch an itch, it gets worse.
Sometimes it gets worse. Hal.
Thank you, David. Wonderful continuation of your talk. I appreciated the example you used of dealing with pain. And I have heard the phrase, there's pain and then there's suffering. And it seems to me that the suffering may result from a lack of recognition and investigation of the experience of the pain. Because I have been thinking about what you taught at the retreat using the RAIN technique of investigating an experience.
Yeah.
And that particularly, to me, has been helpful in dealing with pain. And I just want to
Well, I'm going to repeat that RAIN thing.
Please.
Next month, when we're talking about working with thoughts.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting practice. I just remembered another example. This is not right off yours. It's not about pain, but I remember Ajahn Sumedho, who was one of the great meditation masters of our time. He's an American who trained and lived most of his time in Asia. And his teacher, Ajahn Chah, they were teaching in Thailand in a group, and and they're monks, so they're celibate. And there was a really pretty girl sitting up in the front row, and at the end of the day of teaching, Ajahn Sumedho's teacher leaned over to him and said, "What'd you think of that girl?" And Sumedho said, "Oh, she was pretty. It was pleasant having her here. But I didn't want her." And that's a beautiful example of appreciating the pleasant without going to wanting, without jumping to wanting. So likewise, how often can we as gay men, this is now that I'm in my 60s and retired, how often can we as gay men see somebody that's attractive and not go right to wanting? Like, oh, what a handsome guy. And that's all. Because the wanting has suffering in it, right? Pat?
Thank you. When the neutral is kind of confounding, because in a sense it almost, I mean, as you talk about these three states, I can understand that they come at a cellular level before we react to them or before we think of them, as you say, the reptilian brain.
Yeah.
But neutral, since a lot of our mode of meditating is to be quiet and withdrawn, somehow neutral seems to have value. But then when I follow it too far, instead of happiness, you end up with indifference and non-engagement and not being connected to things, and even in the meditation, fighting with your own thoughts about getting back to neutral. And it's kind of like, well, maybe that's not really the goal, getting to neutral and stopping the thoughts.
No, it's not. And thank you so much for bringing up neutral, because I kind of neglected it in talking about it. Neutral's the hardest one of the three to spot. And you said, originally you said neutral's kind of confounding. That's exactly what neutral is. Neutral is confounding. Neutral, if you dwell in neutral, or if you're stuck in neutral, where you end up is delusion, which is one of the worst places to be in Dharma practice.
Well, why is that?
Sorry?
I don't understand why delusion would result in being neutral.
Neutral is not knowing what's going on, not being aware of what's going on. Neutral, we don't even notice, right? If you're having, for instance, I'm not thinking of a good example, but neutral might be your feeling about the color of the wall in this room, or the temperature, or something that you're just not even aware of. It's not on your radar. We notice what is pleasant, and we notice what's unpleasant. We don't notice what's neutral. It's invisible in our experience.
Yeah, doesn't get our attention.
Well, the word that was coming to mind was distraction. The neutral is kind of like boring, get distracted and caught up with the next pleasant or unpleasant.
Yeah, pleasant or unpleasant or loud. They're attention
They pull you
getters.
one way or the other.
Yeah. Jerry.
Well, so to me, it's what I've been taught. Neutral was, okay, I could react to the person upstairs, or I could say, there's a person walking across the room. Wouldn't that be neutral?
Another way of the way.
Or the temperature
sometimes
is,
the way neutral is defined is neither pleasant nor unpleasant.
Right.
It's not even a state unto itself. It's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But it can be.
But you can notice it though. But what I heard
it's hard to notice.
That you notice it.
It's hard to notice what's neutral in your experience. That's there's so much stuff in our what we see, what we hear in the sensory world that we're always editing out a lot of it.
But wouldn't that be a way of saying, before we go to pleasant or unpleasant, a person walking across the floor, it's just a person walking across the floor.
Right.
I didn't judge it for being negative or for being hot or being feeling good or not feeling good. It's just a person walking across the floor.
If you were truly neutral, you might not have noticed it at all.
True.
David, we have time for just one more.
Okay, one
I was
last one.
just going to say a comment about the neutral is, I would tend to finding when I'm mindful of something, it tends to take on either pleasant or unpleasant. Whereas when like you said, when I don't notice it, it's neutral. But if I thought about, the brick wall, which was neutral, if I become mindful, I think, oh, it's kind of pleasant, it looks kind of nice. So it changes when you're mindful of it.
Really beautiful way of putting it. Thank you for that. That's what I was trying to say. Not very successful. You just said it. Thank you. So thanks for your attention. Next month we're going to be talking about working with thoughts, and especially working with difficult thoughts and difficult emotions that come up in meditation. So more tools.
Thank you. Next week, our speaker will be Bill Weber, who is a senior Vipassana practitioner and a graduate from the Spirit Rocks Community Dharma Leaders Program. Dhamma is the Pali word for generosity. It's what supports our sangha in all that we do, including having this beautiful space and our outreach and the newsletter and things. So a suggested donation of $10 helps us maintain the sangha. Do we have announcements? Do we have a host?
Yes, I'm hosting, so there's healthy fruit, and then there's some processed food type of stuff. With limited sugar added, so it's not too bad. There's a sign-up sheet if you want to get on GBF's mailing list so that you can be in touch with what's going on. A group of us meet at 12:30 to go to lunch. Just meet at the front of the building. Help yourself to tea, and I'll have hot soapy, well, it doesn't get very hot. I'll have soapy water in a little plastic tub. Just place your cup there, and I will mindfully wash them all with less water.
Cass.
Hi, I'm Cass, and I'm the coordinator of hosts, and one of our hosts has had a conflict develop and won't be able to commit on a regular basis any longer. So I'm looking for somebody who might be looking for an opportunity to serve the Sangha in an occasional way. It's once every 2 months is the commitment that we ask for, and I have found it a very pleasant and fulfilling way to be of service to the group. So if this may be of interest to you, please speak to me in the social hour.
Thank you. Okay, let's gather in a circle for identification of energy. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.